Okay, folks, well, welcome to the Robbins house. My name is David Lincoln. I work in the house here as an interpreter, and I'm also on the board of directors. I want to talk to you a little bit about an era that involved one of the house's most prominent members, Ellen Garrison. Ellen Garrison, following the Civil War, moved down to the Baltimore area and Northern Virginia area to work as a teacher for recently emancipated African American students. And she was one of many black and white teachers who were working for something called the Freedmen's Bureau, which was a large welfare organization funded by Congress that was designed to alleviate some of the problems that existed, especially for the recently emancipated people of the South, the freedmen. And one of the things that Ellen and other missionaries had to contend with was the fact that they were, by a horrific accident of history, working under a man who did not believe in their mission. And this was the 17th President of the United States, Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson had grown up in the South. He was from North Carolina. He was poor. He moved to Tennessee, though, and ended up becoming a successful tailor. So he was wealthy, but he was new money, nouveau riche, as the French would say. He enslaved about 10 people, mainly for the status of it. He was not like these big aristocratic plantation owners who were the main movers and shakers in the South. And for that reason, Andrew Johnson did remain loyal to the Union. And in 1864, when Abraham Lincoln was running for re-election, he wanted to send a message that as the Civil War was coming to an end, he, Lincoln, was looking to be a unifying figure. So he dumped his old vice president, Hannibal Hamlin of Maine, who was very much an abolitionist, very much believed in a post-war world where you would have an activist government helping the freed people, men and women who had been enslaved and were now free. Lincoln did not anticipate being assassinated in 1865, so he figured that it was safe to pick a man who was personally quite racist. Andrew Johnson had freed the enslaved people living under his rule, but he still had a lot of sympathy for Southern whites, not necessarily wealthy plantation owners, but lower class Southern whites, people with roots similar to his, who, even though many of them could never aspire to be what the Jefferson Davises of the world could be, the President of the Confederacy. They were not going to be big, rich plantation owners. They were not going to enslave people themselves. But what many lower-class white people in the South feared was that in the wake of emancipation and in the wake of the Union victory in the Civil War, they would be supplanted in society by the newly emancipated people, who they had at least been able to tell themselves, these enslaved black people, I might be poor, life might be hard, the plantation owners might treat me badly, but at least I'm not enslaved, at least I'm white. Andrew Johnson had a lot of sympathy for those people, and that fueled a lot of his thinking when he became president in the spring of 1865 following Abraham Lincoln's assassination. So Andrew Johnson, who is generally considered to be one of, if not the worst presidents in history, He would be in office from 1865 until 1869, and he would use every power at his disposal to try and sabotage organizations like the Freedmen's Bureau, social welfare organizations that work with small organizations like the American Missionary Association, to hire people like Ellen Garrison, to have them go south to help educate the newly emancipated black people of the South. The Freedmen's Bureau, for example, was one of the first organizations that created public education in the South. Nobody had had that before, white or black. Now it's being offered to everybody. A lot of white people refused to accept it because they did not want to be associated with this organization from the North, representing what to them was a foreign power imposing its will on them. But the Freedmen's Bureau did a lot of good in that department. It did a lot of good in terms of feeding impoverished people, white and black, tens of thousands of them, in the wake of the Civil War. Nevertheless, because it was perceived as an organization that was meant to elevate the formerly enslaved black people of the South, there was a lot of white resentment about it in the South, and Andrew Johnson felt sympathy for that resentment. Those lower class people, he saw himself in those lower class southern white people, and he wanted to use his power to help them. He also, to a large extent, got a kick out of having power over the defeated aristocrats of the South, people who had once looked at someone like him as a country bumpkin, one of the reasons why he stayed loyal to the Union. So the things that Andrew Johnson could and did do to stymie Reconstruction. He's Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. What that meant was he could be a roadblock to the Union Army, the U.S. Army, using its power to protect emancipated black people, to protect Northerners who've come south to try and help them. It's something that you see stressed again and again and again when you look at primary sources about this period of Reconstruction following the Civil War. Soldiers were necessary in cities and in rural areas. We need soldiers here to protect us. Freed people are saying, from angry southern whites. White missionaries are saying this as well. We need soldiers. We're not going to be able to vote. Pass all the amendments and all the civil rights bills that you want, if there are not armed men here to protect us, led by commanders who are not afraid to use them. Whatever you put on paper isn't going to mean anything. Andrew Johnson could use his position as Commander-in-Chief of the Army to weaken the Army's efforts to protect freed people and white missionaries in the South. He could fire and reassign generals. One famous example was the legendary cavalry commander Philip Sheridan, who struck terror into the hearts of the Confederacy as few Union commanders did during the Civil War. Following the Civil War, during Reconstruction, Sheridan was commanding a region, a military district in eastern Texas and western Louisiana. And he was a very tough guy, and he was very willing to use his soldiers to crack down on white terrorism directed against freed people. Well, Andrew Johnson had him reassigned. He had another commander named Daniel Sickles, who had lost a leg during the Civil War, reassigned too. He could just move these guys. He could overrule their orders. And one of the most damaging things that this led to was the stymieing of William T. Sherman, another famous Union commander's field order that was designed to divide up the large plantations. Not of all Southern plantation owners, it wasn't even a majority, but enough of them to give freed people something to live on. Well, as Commander-in-Chief, Andrew Johnson, he could overrule that, and he did. So it's interesting because Andrew Johnson would be dealing with a Republican Congress. He was a Democrat, but had remained loyal to the Union. Lincoln picked him, remember, as a unity candidate. Congress, though, was dominated by the Republican Party, which was much, 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 much more powerful in the North. And for that reason, it's going to play an outsized role in Washington, D.C. at this time. The Republicans in Congress got to the point after the 1866 midterm elections where they could override Andrew Johnson's vetoes. When he would veto funding for the Freedmen's Bureau, for example, they could override that. When he would veto civil rights acts, he could override the Congress could override those. But one thing that they could not take away from him was the fact that he was Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, and he could reassign these commanders and make it more difficult to redistribute land and protect freed people and protect white missionaries. And so, even though Congress would, in the later 1860s, step in to rein in Andrew Johnson, pass Civil Rights Act to suspend racist laws in the South, for example, the damage that Andrew Johnson did when he used his position as Commander-in-Chief to stymie the land redistribution was incalculable. Because Civil Rights Acts are great. Constitutional amendments are great, but if you don't have a level of economic equality, you are still going to create a permanent underclass in society. And the failure to divide up those plantations, not even a majority of them, just some of them, in the South, plantations that had been built by enslaved African Americans, worked, made profitable by enslaved African Americans. The failure to redistribute that wealth really sowed the seeds of a lot of the race-based economic inequality that you would see plaguing this country in the late 19th century, throughout the 20th century, and now into the 21st century. What else could Andrew Johnson do as president, even though Congress could override his vetoes? In addition to commanding the armed forces, Andrew Johnson could also pardon people. Lovely right that the president has. He pardoned almost all of the South's leading politicians during the Civil War. He loved it. Again, these are guys that once looked down on him. Andrew Johnson had a very low self-esteem. One civil rights activist who happened to be black called him Your Excellency in a meeting once, and Andrew Johnson, who had been chilly and rude up to that point in the meeting, perked up and started treating everybody in the meeting with more respect. So this is a guy that's got some personal issues here. He loved pardoning the elite aristocrats, the plantation owners, the big-time enslavers of the South. Loved doing it as a way of showing his dominance over them. But this had the effect of letting a lot of, let's face it, traitors off the hook. So when you think about civil rights activists like Ellen Garrison, the fact that they were dealing with such a hostile president, made their work in the South much more difficult. After the first couple of years of missionary work, many white missionaries who had been working for organizations like the American Missionary Association, coordinated by the Freedmen's Bureau, left. By the late 1860s, the teachers working for the American Missionary Association, like Alan Garrison, were overwhelmingly black. They had no choice. They did not have the luxury, okay, of going off and living a different life. They felt like they really needed to work hard for their people, risk their lives, because you have a president who's lackadaisical at best with using the armed forces to protect them. So the damage that Andrew Johnson did, okay, was that he weakened early efforts, okay, of welfare organizations, especially the Freedmen's Bureau, which he tried to kill. He vetoed its funding. The only way that it went into effect was when Congress was able to override his veto. Despite that fact, okay, remember, Andrew Johnson still could do serious damage by ending the redistribution of land, okay, by refusing, okay, to use his position as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, okay, to protect, okay, freed people and their white allies in the South, mainly Republican politicians and then missionaries, okay, and by letting so many enemies of the Union off the hook with his rapid-fire pardons in his first couple of years in office. Andrew Johnson would be impeached by an angry Republican Congress. He would narrowly escape being acquitted in the Senate, being convicted in the Senate. A majority of senators actually voted to convict Andrew Johnson and remove him from office, but you have to get to that 2/3 majority of the Senate, and Johnson's opponents didn't quite get there. So he did limp to the end of his term. He failed to win the Democratic nomination for president in the 1868 election, and in 1869 he would be replaced by Ulysses S. Grant, okay, who would be much more, not a perfect president by any stretch of the imagination, but much more proactive, okay, in terms of using the power of the presidency to help the freed people of the South and their white allies. But despite the fact that that would happen, despite the fact that Andrew Johnson would be called to account for his actions, even if he did get acquitted, the damage he did early on, okay, allowing so much violence to take place against freed people, perhaps most importantly, strangling in its cradle this policy of land redistribution, okay, really giving the formerly enslaved people their due, okay, and then the letting of these plantation-owning traders off the hook. Okay, it did very, very severe damage to Reconstruction, damage that, especially in terms of the land redistribution, future presidents would, to this day, okay, not be able to repair. So, an idea there about the big political picture, okay, in the U.S. as a resident of this house, Ellen Garrison, okay, was forging a legacy of her own during the Reconstruction era. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for visiting our website and for watching this video. If you would like to learn more about some of the things presented here, you can check out our brochures on Ellen Garrison Jackson Clark and on Ellen Jackson as a fighter for freedom during Reconstruction. Thank you so much.